Hi, my name is Abigail Richardson, and this is my thesis on increasing adoption and animal retention rates at Paws Animal Shelter. So the problem is that adoption rates post-COVID compared to pre-COVID and during COVID have dropped significantly. Pre-COVID, it was a steady ebb and flow. It was reliable, animals in, animals out. There was a nice process. There were predictable peaks and troughs, where in the troughs they could be transferred to other animal shelters, and during the peak seasons, other animal shelters would transfer their animals to Paws. During COVID was initially amazing. All these people who had all this free time adopted these animals, after they had been let off of work or they started working from home, and they could take care of several animals at once. There were a lot of pictures shared on social media of animal shelters being completely clear, which seemed amazing at first, until after COVID sort of dwindled down a little bit. People returned to work, people got their jobs back, and they suddenly didn't have time for all these animals. On top of this, animals who had been with their owners nonstop over the course of a year often ended up developing separation anxiety. So when their owners left, they did problematic things such as tearing up furniture, chewing on shoes, peeing on every surface available, etc. So that increased adoption rates even more. So on top of all these adoptions that have been rescinded and all of these animals that are being taken back, we still have that steady flow in from animals that are being rescued from puppy mills, animals that are being taken off the street, that never stops. Unfortunately, this means that we do have to increase euthanization rates for less desirable animals compared to animals that have a better chance of being adopted, just because we don't have enough room. That is what I want to lower with my thesis, those euthanization rates, so that they are at an all-time low or non-existent if possible. So things to consider before developing a product. We want to prioritize the animal's welfare above all else. Their happiness, their healthiness, their safety, their comfort. Safety being the biggest one. We don't want to send all these animals to puppy mills. We don't want to send them to animal fighting rings. We don't want to send them back onto the street. We want them to be in a safe, happy, healthy environment. That is the least that we owe to them. That is the most that we can give them. We want to clear shelters reliably. It was great to clear shelters during COVID until all these animals started coming back. We want to keep the animals out and have them stay out. As much as we love the animals, we can't have them in our shelter anymore. We want them to find a home, but we don't want just foster home to foster home to foster home, especially when we don't know what's going to be a foster home, such as what would happen with COVID. A reliance on volunteers and a result net income if possible go hand in hand. Paws is a state-sponsored organization, so donations, purchases, and tax dollars are the kind of income they get, mostly tax dollars. And the problem with tax dollars is that Tennessee doesn't want to give them a lot of money. They have other projects, such as not fixing the roads on the way to school and leaving all the potholes in them. So Paws only has as much staff as it absolutely needs. It doesn't have wiggle room for extra staff. It doesn't have, a bunch of people lying around waiting to be told something to do. So it has to rely on volunteers. And if at all possible, it should hopefully increase income, because the more money Paws has to dedicate resources to animals and taking care of animals, the better. Some limitations: lack of time. I don't have 13 to 20 years to dedicate to studying and making sure every animal adopted during the month of March 2022 doesn't get returned at some point in its extensive life. I have 1 year, senior year. So for retention rates, there wasn't a lot that I could definitively study. So that is a point that I'll talk about later, where I'm basing a future study off of that. And then lack of existing research. I could find one scientific study done around adoption rates, and that was comparing dogs and puppies, which wasn't very helpful in this case. All of the information that I could find was tangential. It was little tips and tricks. It was non-governmental websites. It was stuff like that. It was very hard to find scientific backing to do so. I'm hoping my thesis helps some other poor student in the future with their research on a topic like this, because this is all gathered into a scientific place. but I digress. So past attempts, past considerations of the problem. Word of mouth was first consideration. It's free. That's always a plus, but it's ultimately unpredictable. You can't guarantee that someone is going to go and talk to their friends about an experience that they had at pause. You can do your best to make sure it's a good experience in case they do talk about it, but there's no guarantee, there's no predictability on how many people to talk to. You could treat one person amazing and they happen to have no friends, they don't talk to anyone, and you could accidentally treat one person poorly and they are a celebrity on social media and it decreases rates immensely. It's not something that we can scientifically really quantify and guess. So it's unpredictable and ultimately ineffective. It's a nice little bonus when you can get people talking about it, especially in the concentrated area where you can get a lot of adoptions at once, but it's not a guarantee. For discounts, this shelter here, the Athens Area Humane Shelter, had a Name Your Price event that I used the poster for. Pause doesn't use this poster, but they use a similar poster, just wasn't online. But Pause is always Name Your Price for cats. They often have free deals for pit bulls because they are one of the considered less desirable breeds because of their inherent aggression. So they have all these discounts that do really help with adoptions. They do help with getting animals out there, but they decrease that income that we were talking about. That's really helpful for animals, or for the animal shelter. It's good, but we can definitely do better because, like I said, Paws needs those resources to continue to be able to, take care of animals. Adoption events were the best consideration that I could find. It involves traveling to a location with a bunch of animals in tow to basically let passerbys adopt them right there on the spot. It's really hard to make time to do so. You have to organize it with big companies such as Petco, PetSmart, etc. A lot of places that sell pet supplies because people who buy pet supplies are more likely to buy a pet because they already have at least one. So it's hard to schedule that. It's hard to make times for staff to come out and do so because, like I said, Paws only has a certain amount of staff. It only has as much staff as it needs. It doesn't have the staff to just give to whatever event this is for several hours. It has to have all hands on deck to keep the shelter running. It does end up with a few animals adopted, but from my mentor, Miss Lindsay, she told me that more people end up coming in afterwards. That's where they see their numbers. That's where they see their increases. The people coming in afterwards, as opposed to people adopting right there. The education that comes with the flyers is really important. That comes with the event, that comes with the flyers to hand out. And this is what I heavily leaned upon in my design process. So my first idea and its issues were essentially someone would have a very friendly button that says something along the lines of, hey, come talk to me if you want to adopt one of these animals. And they would be walking 4, 5, 6 dogs all at once in a public spot, such as Lowe's was a big one because they allow animals. Parks, obviously. So they would just have, stuff like that. They would have a lot of space and a lot of people to reach. So there would be on-the-spot adoption done by volunteers. These volunteers would, just basically sign a couple papers, give them to whatever passerby they see. That is incredibly unsafe. Paws has background checks for a reason. And we can't just hand out animals willy-nilly to anyone who comes by. They have to be vetted, they have to be researched, they have to be well known. Also, because this would be carried out by volunteers, it is incredibly illegal. You have to have a license to hand out animals and do legal adoptions. Employees of Paws are under the Paws organization and have that license to do so. Volunteers are not part of the Paws organization and they do not have the ability to just hand animals out to random passerbys. It's completely illegal and not something that I'm willing to risk for my senior thesis. Occupying public spaces, there wasn't anything wrong with that. I take that with me throughout several of my prototypes. It was a good, there were no issues there. So my modification, on the spot, adoption still, All the same caveats from before carry over. Unsafe, just basically just unsafe. It's done by staff though instead to eliminate the illegality. But then that leads back into the issue. It costs money to pay these staff. It's unrealistic to do. It's a waste of resources. Just we don't have the staff to waste on stuff like this. It has to have that reliance on volunteers. So my final product, it had to be, there are no on-the-spot adoptions. Those were out of the picture because of safety. Focus on education rather than adoptions right there, right then, because that was what I wanted to absolutely quantify. Not spontaneous, definitely a vetting process. Uses volunteers, so like I said, can't be on the spot adoptions. It needs to focus on volunteers. And finally, reliability. We're not sending all these animals out into unsafe situations, then having to keep them right back in. It has to be reliable. So my final product involved having a dog, my dog, Felix, out as sort of a lure and handing out flyers. So these flyers had a lot of information about paws on them, as well as a dog to sort of grab attention. I don't have it listed here because I have one in class, but these flyers would help grab people's attention and lead them to information about paws that had the website on the bottom. It focused on discussion and verbalization. I would, even though they had the poster, I would read out everything on the poster because a lot of people wouldn't give the poster a second glance, but by voicing these benefits, then it helps people sort of cement into their brain, oh, hey, Paws is doing this. Paws has Name Your Price cats. Paws has free adoptions on Fridays. And there were several options offered as well. I didn't give them a flyer and said, here, adopt a dog. I was like, you can adopt a dog. If you have a friend who's interested in adopting an animal, they can adopt an animal. You can post it on social media. You can do anything you want. You can fold it into a paper airplane and send it into the wind. There were a lot of options offered. Obviously, the last one was a joke, but there were a lot of options offered, which helped relieve some of the stress on passerbys. I did this for 3 days, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. I'll talk about that in a second. So initial observations. Most people adopted or took flyers on the weekends. Saturday was my biggest day. I probably gave out 20 plus flyers. I honestly lost count of how many flyers I was giving out because 2, 3, 4 people were coming at me at once. Whereas Thursday, I stood out there for 2 hours and I gave out absolutely 0 flyers. No one approached me. There just wasn't enough foot traffic. A lot of people saw the posters first before they saw the dog, or if they saw the dog, they would come up to the dog, see the flyers, and then turn the other direction. While this was disheartening, it led to more consensual interactions between me and whatever passerby I was advertising to, because they knew that they were being advertised to. They knew that they were being given something in return for interacting with this dog. So it wasn't just spontaneous, hey, here's a flyer, now go on. It was something that they knew they were getting into. And that helps with the bright colors of my flyer as well, because it helps grab people's attention. So as for data analysis, here are all the numbers for March of 2020, 2021, 2022. For 2020, the adopted compared to the intake, 77.97% of animals were adopted March of 2020. That's my control group. I know that COVID started around March 15th, March 16th, but it didn't start getting really bad until sometime early April. So we're still using this as our control because this was still not affected by COVID. March 2021, we had a total adoption rate of 69.17% of adopted compared to intake, because this was when, COVID had been going on for a year. People were going back to work, people were going back to school a little bit. So adoption rates were really going down. And then March 2022, the month that I experimented on, there was a whopping 84.80% of animals adopted. As you can see, there was also a decrease in intake rates, but I cover that in this slide. So statistics kids will recognize this Z-score formula. You don't need to know all of this. This is just showing how I did this. So the p-value is the p the p hat, thank you, value is the intake plus intake, or sorry, adopted plus adopted over intake plus intake. So for example, 2020 2021, or compared to 2020 compared to 2021 would be 184 plus 186 over 236 plus 240, et cetera, and then you plug all those numbers into here. So that ends up with this number, which ends up with a z-score of 364.16, comparing 2021 to 2022, and a comparison of, or a z-score of 173.18, comparing 2020 and 2022. So what does this mean? This looks complicated. It's not. What I need you to know is what z-scores mean. So as we see, there's numbers on the side and numbers on the top. So the numbers on the side are the first two values of the z-score, and so like the first number and then one decimal after, and then on the top row, that's the second decimal after. So say a z-score of 0.81, that would be in the 79th percentile. As you can see, this only goes up to 0.349. Oops, I didn't mean to click that. This only goes up to 0.349, and that ends up in the 99.98 percentile. A z-score of 173 or 364 is much higher than that. So there is an absolute 0% chance, or an astronomically tiny chance, that these two numbers are in the same spectrum and could be produced unless there was a significant difference between the 2 years, 2022 compared to 2020 and 21 respectively. So ultimately, it was a success, and we did end up with more adoptions in the year of 2022. So implications in the future. Hopefully, this ends up being a viable way to save and help animals. I would really like for my product to be able to help shelters in the future past just this thesis, to be able to decrease euthanization rates and end up with more happy families and happy animals. Like I said, limitation of time prevents study of retention. I wanted to focus a lot on retention rates because retention rates going down is what caused such a significant shift in 2021 to 2022, because all those animals being returned after COVID, quote unquote, ended. But I think that is a good base for someone who has a lot more time to take all these animals, to take all this qualitative data into the quantitative data, and sort of gauge customers' happiness over time with their animal, ebbs and flows, how many animals are returned, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that would be a really good base point to go off of in the future. So yeah, again, I'm Abigail Richardson, and this is my thesis. Thank you.